In many video games, the player character is the prime mover, the one that every single plan or event hinges around. In the Elder Scrolls games, this is especially true as you are literally a figure of destiny. In the Elder Scrolls IV Oblivion, this would be the Hero of Kvatch. Unfortunately for the people of Cyrodiil, today the Hero of Kvatch isn't there to save them. Instead, we look at the state of Cyrodiil just before and during the Oblivion Crisis without John Oblivion there to tie their shoelaces, run their errands, and save them from like 10 different crises. Since this is all hypotheticals built upon hypotheticals, we need to try and organize this a bit. First, we see how each major city and its surroundings fares without the Hero of Kvatch. Quests will play out without player involvement. This does not preclude another likely candidate from completing the more inconsequential, like run-of-the-mill tasks. There are other adventures out there. The guilds, the town guard sometimes does stuff. They can be expected to handle or mitigate some things. Next, we'll look at the consequences for the guilds we find in Cyrodiil. Guild quests are still going to show up in that first section that I just mentioned, but since guilds are like large region-spanning bodies, we should see how they're doing overall. It'll be nice to recap them. Finally, we will address the Oblivion Crisis and whether anyone in Cyrodiil is equipped to effectively resist the Daedric invasion in a meaningful way. If at any point you think I missed something, please let me know in the comments. Doing research for this video reminded me just how many quests there are in Oblivion, how much lore is present, and how many characters are running around. So something definitely could have slipped by.
What the fuck is this piece of shit?
One of the noteworthy things about Leyawiin is the presence of a stand-in for the player character, someone who exudes gallantry, a drive to be a hero, and the skills to accomplish greatness. That would be Mazoga the Orc. I'm convinced that even without the Hero of Kvatch, she would be stubborn enough to track down Mogan's Windshifter, a nearby bandit. Next, Mazoga would normally get sent with the Hero of Kvatch to then clear out the Black Bow bandits at Tilapia? On her own, she's toast trying to fight Brugo of the Black Bow bandits, and Brugo doesn't even use a Black Bow, unlike his Black Bow bandit brethren. Where did Brugo's Black Bow go? I don't know. But we can be certain that the Black Bow bandits will become entrenched in the ruins and caves near Leyawiin. There's a skooma ring that would normally be wiped out by the player, and honestly, I could see Mazoga getting duped into doing it if you told her that Weebum Na was there, or the local guards might just take care of it.
We must get that poison they're selling off the street.
It's in Greyland, an abandoned building just outside of Leyawiin. If you step outside the city walls, you're either going to have arrows shot at you by bandits, or you'll see the extrajudicial killing of some skooma addicts. Inside the city, there are plenty of awful things going on too. Rosentia is going to be stuck with 4 dirty, noisy scamps living with her forever.
Please, help me.
Or even better, she'll drag herself to Dark Fathom Cave and get ripped apart by the Daedra inside. Sidrasa is not going to get his paws on Garridan's tears, so he's going to be bummed about that, I guess. Daedgale, leader of the local chapter of the Mages Guild, isn't going to get her sanity-restoring amulet, the Seer's Stone. This can go one of 2 directions. Either the Leyawiin's Mages Guild is essentially paralyzed, or local reformed necromancer and eyebrow enthusiast Kalthar will attempt to oust Daedgale and take control for himself. Amuse, a member of the Thieves Guild, is still stuck in prison, and Adarji doesn't have her fancy ring anymore. In Water's Edge, north of Leyawiin, Bien Emilion is either going to die trying to retrieve a family heirloom to hawk to the nearest merchant, or she's going to live in crippling, life-threatening debt. However, she probably wouldn't live too long anyway, because it turns out the Blackwood Company is going to send a bunch of soldiers hopped up on his sap to kill everyone in Water's Edge. The Blackwood Company would have done that anyway, regardless of the hero's presence, but the rest of the events surrounding the company would be very different. Azani Blackheart is a warrior that was originally supposed to be killed by the Fighters Guild, but Blackwood Company took credit for the job, didn't even kill Azani, and then made the Fighters Guild look like a bunch of incompetent morons. Which they are. We'll get back to that later. With Azani hiding out and the Fighters Guild unable to kill him and prove that the company pulled the wool over everyone's eyes, the Fighters Guild's reputation just gets worse and worse. Similar to Mazoga the Orc, the Fighters Guild has someone with serious protagonist energy named Modron Orion. However, I don't think he can take on Blackwood Company by himself, and he probably gets offed going after Ajum Kajin, a high-ranking member of Blackwood Company. This would only serve to worsen public perception of the Fighters Guild and feed growth of the Blackwood Company. Imagine, you have two competing Fighters Guild-esque groups, but one sends one of their senior-most members to go kidnap the other. Like, it looks pretty awful. Without Modron or the hero, the use of his sap is likely to go unnoticed, or it just gets normalized after a while. The Blackwood Company gets results with it, and who's gonna stop them? I want to give Leyawiin some good news and say, yeah, Amadeus Philida gets to retire after a long career of hindering the Dark Brotherhood. But let's be real here, the only organization that seems to be competent and have plentiful workers is the Dark Brotherhood. And they'd probably just send somebody else. But you know what? I feel bad for you, Leyawiin. Grandpa Police Guard gets to live. Scartail too, since the hero normally goes to kill them as a personal favor to some members of the Dark Brotherhood. Scartail might just get killed by an Argonian agent though. He somehow managed to upset two groups of people that specialize in assassination. We'll say that Kalia Draconis also survives due to an atypically lazy Dark Brotherhood. Draconis is captain of the guard, so this is a little bit more consequential, since at this point the Fighters Guild is basically defunct, the Mages Guild is a mess, and Blackwood Company is slaughtering strange, unarmed, non-hostile goblins located entirely within people's houses. Leyawiin needs some alternative to the Blackwood Company, and at this point I think they're just going to have to settle for the local guards. Andreas Draconis, owner of the Drunken Dragon and sibling of Captain Draconis, also survives. His only customer, a single Imperial Legion soldier, breathes a sigh of relief. Nearby Fort Telemann will come under the control of necromancers, and the Bloodworm Helm is stashed away there for Mannimarco to pick up at his convenience. In summary, Leyawiin's fate is now in the hands of Blackwood Company, a thinly spread Draconian city guard, and the dynamic duo of Mazoga and Modron, until both of them run headfirst into their respective death traps. Blackwood Company could handle some of the local issues if they are motivated enough to handle it, but there's a very real chance that they might just absorb the Blackbow bandits and become the de facto authorities in the area. Once the Oblivion Crisis kicks off, the largest, strongest, most aggressive organization in the area might not actually be too terrible to have around. But until it's a literal hell on earth and you need these psychopaths to charge into the Oblivion Gates, it's a pretty clear downgrade, and the Hero of Kvatch is missed here. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. There's a guy that runs a people hunting business in Bravil, technically at nearby Fort Grief. His name is Curtin Grodragal, and without the hero, this enterprise will just keep going, unless he kidnaps, like, the Oblivion equivalent of John Wick. Nearby, we also find the wreck of the ship Emma May, which is home to several murderous ghosts. They are spirits of its old mutinous crew. Grantham Blakely, the only crewmate who remained loyal during the May's mutiny, was chained to a post, and his spirit roams the shores of Nibbin Bay. Without the Hero of Kvatch, I guess he's going to be roaming a little while longer. Lithnilian, a scholar of Welkin Stones, isn't going to get his precious research notes from Bramblepoint Cave. Could this have led to organic farming of Welkin Stones, which can then instantly charge someone's magicka reserves, ushering in an era of near limitless magical potential? Maybe, but since Skyrim takes place 200 years later and we don't have magical flying cars and unlimited energy, it's safe to say that this kind of goes nowhere. Or maybe Lithnilian just gets the patent stolen. Whatever. The Mages Guild in Bravil faces some minor tribulations. Ardalian has her staff stolen by Varen Vamori because he has the mentality of a kindergartner. Without the hero to get it back, I guess Ardalian will just need to make or buy a replacement and hopefully use it to combust this incel. Another mage, Hanatier, is stuck in a magically induced dream. Sorry, buddy. Surely no intense power struggle will siphon away resources that could be used to help you. On the bright side, no one is going to steal the Arrow of Extrication from Fathus Aaron. I know you were all worried about that one. Normally, during the Thieves Guild questline, Herminus Lex would get reassigned to protect Countess Umbranox, but I guess he's staying in Imperial City, making life difficult for the guild. Magler is going to cause more problems for the Fighters Guild, having defected to Blackwood Company, costing them a contract. And I guess without the hero, the news will get back to the Fighters Guild a little later, I guess. The cave quality near Bravil takes an absolute nosedive without the Hero of Kvatch around. There's a band of fugitives that have made Bloodmane Cave their base of operations. There's a necromancer that will likely ascend to Lichdom in Leafrock Cave. And finally, there is Lost Boy Cavern, which contains a composite lich, a lich with like 2 souls in it. Without the Hero of Kvatch, Lost Boy Cavern is more dangerous than ever. How many more boys could get lost there? On a more serious note, Nenalada is an Ayleid ruin across the Niben Bay, and it may become home to a weird separatist movement, Ayleid revival. There's a collector in Imperial City named Umbacano who could get his hands on a crown of an old Ayleid king. If he's successful, he'll travel to Nenalada, and it's not really clear. I think he gets possessed, but either way, his new alter ego is intent on rebuilding the Ayleid city-state of Nenalada. So, I don't know if he's raising the dead Ayleids to populate this new polity, or if he's going to try to hand out pamphlets to local elves and say return to tradition, but something's going on there. Bravil doesn't have the near total collapse of local power structures that Leyawiin has, but I continue to lose faith in the Mages Guild's ability to protect its members' well-being, or just their property. Umbacano and his little experiment in Nenalada are probably going to fester for a while in isolation, depending on his recruitment methods, whether it's attracting Mer dissidents or just reanimating Ayleids for his forces. This local issue could escalate if he remains unchecked. And if you're a freak cryptid, evil wizard man, or a professional recreational lawbreaker, I suggest finding a nice cool cave next to Bravil, because that's the place to be, apparently.
Get out of my way before I have you slapped in irons.
What you gonna do when they come for you?
After the rough starts in Bravil and Leyawiin, we've got to be in for some peace and tranquility, right? We have a corrupt cop sucking the life out of this city. This guy is so hated that even his second in command can't wait to get rid of him. However, in a fictional situation that has no bearing on reality, the good guard doesn't really do anything about the bad guard, so it's likely that without the hero's intervention, Cheydinhal is going to, at best, witness the murder of their head guard. At worst, we might see some actual rioting. While the streets run red with the blood of the proletariat fighting against class traitors, this guy is stuck in the chalk zone because of a magical paintbrush or something. Oops! The Uder-Freakta matron will menace Dive Rock, tragically killing people before the fall can. And don't worry guys, the Fighters Guild doesn't need Blackwood Company to mess things up for them in this city. They can do it all by themselves. In Desolate Mine, they sent off fighters without proper weaponry. I'm honestly shocked. Normally the Hero of Kvatch would run this errand, but it isn't a huge stretch of the imagination to think some other low-ranking member could just do it. Or better yet, everyone in Desolation Mine just forgets how to blink and breathe at the same time, and the entire party is wiped out. Lord Rugdump's daughter, Rogbutt... I can't do this anymore. His daughter will remain imprisoned by ogres, perhaps even killed. I shudder to think of a world that would have been robbed of this prestigious bloodline.
Precedeth most urgent-like.
The residents of nearby Harlan's Watch have a problem. They see strange lights in the woods, and they go to investigate, never to return. These lights, actually will-o-wisps, are near Swampy Cave, which is actually infested with swamp trolls. Now, I'm no historian, I don't know which one came first, if the cave was named after the variety of trolls that came to occupy it, or if the trolls moved in after hearing that a cave shared a descriptor with them. But I'd like to think that the lemmings over in Harlan's Watch would eventually figure this one out, although judging by the pile of bodies in there, they have a knack for just throwing themselves into harm's way. Harlan's Watch is either going to completely die off due to stupidity, or only its brightest citizens will be left. Truly a devastating loss for what might possibly be the greatest source of recruits for the Fighters Guild. Speaking of messing up royally, we've got to cover the local Mages Guild goings-on. Falcar, an undercover necromancer, is going to continue getting new recruits killed using the old Ring of Burden in the Well trick. How no one has brought this up to HR is a mystery. There's another necromancer hideout in Dark Fissure Cave that's going to go undetected without the hero's help. The excavations in Vodacen will grind to a halt, surprisingly without the interference of a necromancer. Instead, the guild's lack of higher level thinking prevents them from solving the puzzle, which requires them to shoot the pillars with "hey, shoot me with the spell" signs on them. On the Thieves Guild side of things, there are a few local artifacts that won't be snatched up, the bust of Lady Lathasa, and Sevilla's Stone. Remember the early Draconaces that the Dark Brotherhood was killing? There's another one hanging out in Muck Valley Cavern, just chilling with her animals. I know her survival doesn't change much in the grand scheme of things, but it makes me feel good knowing she gets to survive a while longer. In my eyes, the biggest obstacle in Cheydinhal seems to be the corruption within the Guard. At this point, I'm utterly convinced the Fighters Guild, the Mages Guild bring nothing to the table in terms of societal benefit, so it's incredibly worrying when the Guard is in trouble too. Harlan's Watch is in peril, but I honestly think once the situation with the Guard is resolved, it's business as usual. Just don't join a guild and don't venture into any nearby caves. Non-guild business in Bruma is looking pretty good. Local vampire hunter Reynold Dralis killed a vampire, aka his former adventuring buddy, and will probably just get away with it. Similarly, Arnora and Yorinder are headed towards a sad fate. Arnora is probably going to get killed by Tyrellius, a corrupt guard, and Yorinder is going to stay imprisoned. And Countess Narina doesn't get another nifty little Akaviri artifact in her collection. Slight addendum to that whole non-guild business looking pretty good thing. If you are living in or near Fort Pale Pass, this situation may not be considered pretty good, as there are still undead hanging out there. The nearby Iliad ruin of Sedor will remain infested with ogres, and the Stone of St. Alicia will remain within. Local rich snob Bainlin will most likely not have a Minotaur head fall on his head to death. The local chapter of the Mages Guild gets to enjoy cheeky pranks from Jaskar, and then is promptly wiped out by Manamarco, King of Worms. Jaskar and the rest of the chapter are killed, and since the Hero of Kvatch won't be there to report on what happened, I guess the rest of the guild will learn about Manamarco's return a little bit later. Ignoring the impending Oblivion Crisis and the fact that Manamarco is based just a short walk away in Echo Cave, Bruma isn't too bad. Honestly, you might even consider it a plus that the Mages Guild got wiped out before they could make things worse. But you kind of trade that with a, demigod necromancer guy living next door. There's a little give and take here.
There will come a payday, hallelujah, what a payday.
Welcome to Chorrol. Within the city walls, the absence of the Hero of Kvatch isn't too bad either. The long-separated Germain brothers won't reunite, unfortunately, and their estate at Weatherly will remain overrun by ogres, but that's not a huge tragedy. Countess Ariana will either not find her painting, or the investigation will just take a little while longer. Likewise, there are a couple members of the Mages Guild that will miss out on a book titled Fingers of the Mountain. The worst thing that happens within the city walls without the Hero of Kvatch present is our boy Francois Motier here being unable to fake his death. Otherwise, he will be actually very real dead, or just beaten and extorted. A tragic fate for Cyrodiil's only Frenchman. Outside of the city, though, Chorrol is in the running for the worst place to live. Or in the case of the Odil family, die, because their farm is going to remain overrun with goblins, and Rallis and Antis will be slain. Varanus Danton, son of the leader of the Fighters Guild, might die in Nonwell Cave if he isn't escorted by a skilled fighter, otherwise he'll just die to the Blackwood Company later on. Since the sky is blue in this part of Cyrodiil, there is yet another necromancer hideout, specifically Fort Antis. There's a magical amulet or something here that they stole from the Mages Guild. Manamarco will pick it up when he's on one of his afternoon strolls. There lies something sinister south of Chorrol. Something that will continue to snatch away innocent lives until something horrific awakens from the depths of the earth. I speak, of course, of Hackdirt. In the short term, Dharma is likely going to be sacrificed to the Deep Ones unless somebody randomly develops a conscience. But I don't think that's happening anytime soon. The question is, what will be the end result of Dharma's sacrifice? We have to consider a few things here. Will one sacrifice be enough, or will the denizens of Hackdirt continue to steal people away? I think it's safe to say that even if one sacrifice is enough to bring back the Deep Ones, whoever they are, the devout people of Hackdirt will continue their offerings. Next, we don't know what the Deep Ones can do. According to the locals, the Deep Ones managed to make the inhabitants of the town wealthy with their mines. However, this might just be what they bargained for initially, and who's to say if new offerings are made, if the wrath of the Deep Ones couldn't be brought down upon Chorrol or anyone else that it's directed towards. But the Imperial Legion did manage to drive away the Deep Ones, allegedly, so how tough could they really be? I think we can say conservatively that Hackdirt will at least lead to more disappearances and lead to what amounts to another separatist movement if we let it fester. Given the number of places that have just been left to ruin in the countryside, I'm inclined to think that the local authorities have to cut places like the Cyrodiil farm loose as acceptable losses. At the very least, the local chapters of the Mage and Fighters Guild seem to be halfway competent and could provide some relief. Skingrad is a departure from our usual formula of, the countryside is dangerous, but safety can be found within the walls. Do you see this little freak? His name is Glarthir. He's paranoid and he will pay 1,000 gold to have someone kill his neighbors. Or he'll just kill them himself. Looks like a nice court here, right? Wrong! There's a necromancer here too! Not enough to satisfy your lust for danger, there's a vampire living inside the castle too, eating whoever gets thrown in the dungeon. To hell with it! The Count is a vampire! That part isn't dangerous though, he's actually pretty nice. Sorry, Sindarian, you'll have to find somebody else to harvest Nirnroot for you. The whodunit murders at Summit Mist Manor may or may not happen, since another Dark Brotherhood agent is already there. Like, the Dark Brotherhood literally had 2 people on location, but one of the agents is just like the doorman, I guess. I think he could slip in and get the job done. The incompetence that we've grown to appreciate from the Mages Guild has been refined in this city, in which the local chapter has encouraged one of their own to practice his craft in a cave so that he can't mess with the rest of the guild members. This guy is so awful, he managed to summon 6 hostile zombies on himself, so he's probably getting ripped apart without the hero's intervention. Back to Count Janus for a moment. He isn't so bad, but he is hesitant to trust the Mages Guild. Eventually, a band of vampire hunters arrive to exterminate some vampires at the aptly named Bloodcrust Cave. Normally, the Hero of Kvatch would smooth things over by making sure these 2 groups are removed through any means necessary, and then the Count will trust the Mages Guild since the hero was acting on their behalf. None of that goes down, and I don't know if it actually matters. In the original timeline, Janus is the one that, helps inform the Mages Guild that Mannimarco's back. In this new timeline, Mannimarco has wiped out one of the local chapters. He's going on little strolls with stolen artifacts. I think they would just find out eventually, but every moment counts when you're dealing with a necromantic demigod, so this might hurt the Mages Guild. I think it's more consequential that relations with Count Janus and the Mages Guild are going to continue to be damaged, and it's unlikely that they'll work together on future issues. Remember Falcar from earlier? He's here to cause problems for the Mages Guild yet again. He'll ensure that the Necromancers remain in possession of a special soul gem that was originally part of Archmage Traven's plan to defeat Mannimarco, so kind of makes things a little bit more difficult. And completely unrelated to any guild intrigue or politicking, backstabbing, The West Wheeled Bears will continue to terrorize Shardrock Farm. The vampiric Count Janus is probably Skingrad's saving grace, while the rest of the situation looks pretty awful. Janus states that he's willing to put up a hell of a fight against Mehrunes Dagon, and that he would never throw in his lot with the Necromancers. But unfortunately, he needs to contend with the suspicion of the Mages Guild, infiltration from the Necromancers. In and around Skingrad, there's some pretty hilariously awful ways to die, and there's only so much Janus can do as both a person physically limited by only having one body, and the fact that he's a vampire trying to fly under the radar. In this new timeline, we can imagine Janus acting as Skingrad's Batman, handling bureaucratic matters in his castle during the day, and at night trying to stop Glarthir from killing his neighbors. There's actually one issue near Kvatch that we can discuss that is probably unrelated to the Oblivion Crisis, and that is the Sunken One. Deep within Sandstone Cavern is a being that was the object of worship of a local cult. Well, I mean, at this point it was just one guy, but he thought that this was actually the thing responsible for the destruction of Kvatch, not the Oblivion Crisis. But let's be honest with ourselves, the Sunken One seems content to just sit in the depths of this cave, and it's probably just going to cause problems for anyone seeking refuge in it. So let's move on to a place that is in a smoldering rubble or has a weird lightning golem thing in it.
Do what you want 'cause a pirate is free. You are a pirate.
Anvil's woes are refreshingly mundane for the most part. Yes, there is the Serpent's Wake and the restless spirits floating around a crystal ball or whatever, but that's besides the point. We have like 4 completely normal, silly gangs running around. There's an all-female gang that preys on married men, a group of disgruntled former employees that keep breaking into Lel's quality merchandise, Bjolfi and his marauder gang at Fort Strand, and a gang of thieves occupying Hrota Cave. There's a crew of cattle smuggling pirates that will eventually escalate to more extreme piracy, or normal piracy. They're going to move on to non-cattle related crimes is the point I'm trying to make. We do have some necromancer presence with Caminalda committing acts of banditry along the Golden Road, but still it's nothing really connected to the Manamarco plan, so it's good old-fashioned highwayman stuff. Benaris Manor will remain an expensive, cursed, haunted, expensive, awful, horrendous, wrecked, haunted, expensive place that costs a lot of money and has ghosts. It takes a literal figure of destiny to make this place livable. If the haunted manor wasn't messing with property values enough, poor Arvena has a neighbor who keeps releasing mountain lions nearby to kill her pet rats. Since the Fighters Guild probably doesn't have the manpower for it, Alante the Scholar is going to head to Brittle Rock Cave alone, or with substandard escort, to study the destroyed shrine to Moloch Bal. This is generally considered a bad move and will get her torn asunder by the various Daedra inhabiting the cave. At Fort Such, there's a bedridden warrior named Roderick. He's the target of a Dark Brotherhood contract, and due to a mysterious illness that he's contracted, he's basically in a coma. Outside of his mercenary gang moving on under new leadership, I don't really see this situation changing much without the Hero of Kvatch. Worst case scenario, he eventually makes a recovery and begins to cause problems near Anvil. In all likelihood though, some other Dark Brotherhood assassin, or perhaps even an underling of Roderick, will put him out of his misery. Anvil is miserable, but in like a relatable kind of way. Scheming neighbors, highwaymen, violent gangs aplenty, but nothing that the guards couldn't feasibly handle if someone lit a fire under them. The more supernatural issues like Benaris Manor or Serpent's Wake can just kind of be ignored, or you burn down the manor and sink the ship if they cause too many problems. If Countess Umbernox can rally the guard, this can be managed. At last, our trip around Cyrodiil brings us to... Hold on! Before we go into the capital, we need to assess the situation in the outlying areas. The Order of the Virtuous Blood, a vampire hunting order of dubious standing, is actually being led by a vampire named Cyrodiil. As hilarious as it is, the fact that a vampire has infiltrated the city and has infested nearby a memorial cave with fellow vampires is a little concerning. Of equal or perhaps greater concern is a potato-stealing ogre that roams south of the city. Without a noble hero to bring it to justice, no produce will be safe from the hungry beast. Perhaps it can stop by Wannet Inn, but it better not expect to wash down those delicious spuds with shadow-banished suds, because that vintage apparently requires the Hero of Kvatch to assemble. The prospective village of Cropsford, as well as the exhausted mine, will continue to be infested with goblins. Moss Rock Cavern has a local necromancer that will need to be addressed by someone else without the hero's presence. And the Inn of Ill Omen, tragically, will continue to be stuck with Rufio. The villagers of Ailswell are stuck with the curse of invisibility that's been placed upon them by resident wizard Ankatar. I don't believe that Ankatar is entirely harmless. He's just a very busy wizard, and the world might literally end before he gets around to, undoing that whole curse business. Okay, now we can go into the Imperial City. First up, let's go to the arena. The champion, Agranak Gromalog, will continue his dominant reign, unburdened by the fact that his father is a vampire. While that's great for him, his dad, Lord Leviticus, is still going insane because he can't drink any blood off in Crowhaven. Moving on to the prisons, there's a chance that Valen Dreth survives, or someone else from the Dark Brotherhood comes to kill him, but I don't think anyone is up to the task. Up in the Arcane University, we have more setbacks. Sorry, but the Mages Guild is 100% prohibited from having nice things. At Wellspring Cave, the deaths of Aletta and Zarasha at the hands of necromancers will go unnoticed a little longer. Either enough initiates attempting to make staves for themselves will never return, or eventually one of them will be strong enough to fend off the necromancers infesting the cave. It is kind of funny to imagine that they are just going to send wave after wave of initiates and not bother to, realize that they're dying, but it's the Mages Guild. The Necromancer ambush at Nenyan Twill will still catch the Battle Mages off guard. In this new timeline, we're forced to assume the plucky Battle Mage 5th Roger still does this. In the Market District, the corrupt guard Audins of Vidius will keep shaking down local businesses and customers alike. Adding to the commercial friction is the Copious Coin Purse, a store that supplements its stock with goods acquired via grave robbing. And we're up to our third undercover vampire. This one's living in the Imperial City. Goes by the name Jackman, aka Earl of Imbil, aka Spring-Heeled Jack, aka Spring Nasty, aka Jack Impala, aka Jack Benjamins, aka... Speaking of the Thieves Guild, Hieronymus Lex is going to keep the Waterfront District locked down, so it's going to make things a little bit harder for them. The guild eventually sets up a plan where multiple thieves steal different things from different locations to kind of draw the heat away. We can probably assume that they put this plan together again, it's just a little bit slower since they don't have the Hero of Kvatch to help out. This lockdown may or may not interfere with the hijacking of the bloated float. If the float is properly secured, the Blackwater Brigands will likely just get cut down by the guard. If left to go on their hunt for the legendary and entirely fictitious Golden Galleon, though, they're likely to just dump the staff overboard and then sail off with a piece of real estate. Both Matthias, Draconis, and Phalion will probably get struck down by the Dark Brotherhood, Matthias being a well-armed but socially unimportant nobody, and Phalion being a formerly well-connected but now addicted to skooma and murdering his friends nobody. Other than this tragedy, Pirate Captain Gaston Toussaint will continue to live out his life of debauchery, at least until some other initiate into the Dark Brotherhood is sent after him. So overall, how does the Imperial City fare? The situation outside the city isn't too dire, if you don't consider a cave infested with vampires to be too big of a deal. Inside the city, we have literal and metaphorical bloodsuckers, with 2 vampires with free reign in the city, and an overzealous city guard that are willing to employ collective punishment in their efforts to catch the Grey Fox. It's a matter of how proactive the local vampire population will be in moving into the city, and then how likely Lex is to shift his focus from catching thieves to defending the city from an actual murderous threat. Could he pry himself away from his Grey Fox posters to play Vampire Hunter?
Oh, what a joke.
Well, there we have it. Every quest of consequence outside of the Oblivion Crisis. We've had our summaries for each major location, but how are the various guilds holding up? We're going to start off with the organization that has the most optimistic outlook, the Dark Brotherhood. The Brotherhood has the benefit of decreased order and law enforcement in nearly every area we've looked at, with perhaps an exception to the waterfront district in Imperial City. I think it's safe to assume that it'll take the Dark Brotherhood a little bit longer to achieve their aims without the Hero of Kvatch working for them, but this is also mitigated by the fact that the Hero of Kvatch isn't tearing apart the organization from the inside. For those of you not familiar, there's a member of the Dark Brotherhood named Matthew Bellamont. You see, Mr. Bellamont is a little mischievous, a little silly, and normally he swaps the dead drop orders from Lucien LeChance, which leads to...
No! I'm too late. I thought I could get here in time. Thought I could stop you!
So Bellamont's scheme might not get off the ground in this new timeline, but originally he hit absolute pay dirt with the Hero of Kvatch. It's beyond belief that he'd find a second new member of the Brotherhood who'd somehow manage to mow through the Brotherhood's senior leadership. All it would take is one failed attempt or one successful attempt with enough downtime or hang-ups between missions, and the plot would be revealed. Bellamont's plot aside, several locations in Cyrodiil are plunged into violence or hanging on the precipice. I think this is better for the Dark Brotherhood, as it means there are more people hiring assassins, but I suppose it could mean there's less demand for killers for hire if everyone is already getting their hands dirty. Fighting in the streets means there's no need for stealth. Market outlook is uncertain for the Dark Brotherhood, but when the future of your organization sounds like a boring stockholders meeting, that beats the hell out of existential threats or, not being able to see your wife ever again. But who could I be talking? Thieves Guild! Sorry, Grey Fox, you're gonna be stuck wearing that cowl forever. Seriously, I don't think he's gonna be able to pull off his crazy curse-breaking scheme without the Hero of Kvatch. And because the timeline isn't altered by the Grey Fox's identity hopping to the Hero of Kvatch, that means the Thieves Guild also doesn't get their fancy new guild hall. Other issues, Hieronymus Lex is on the prowl and will make life hell for the Thieves Guild. I don't know if he could actually catch the Grey Fox, given the abilities afforded by the Grey Cowl, but everyone else? On the flip side, the Thieves Guild could stand to profit from the social upheaval going on, at least in the short term. Pre-Oblivion Crisis, I'd suspect that operations outside of the Imperial City might actually improve, while any guild activities within the capital really feel the squeeze from Lex. Leyawiin might be dangerous for the guild to operate, considering the local guard are fairly harsh, and Blackwood Company might be even worse enforcers if they manage to catch wind of the guild. Cheydinhal, Bravil, Bruma, Chorrol, Skingrad, Kvatch, and Anvil are probably all still open for business. Until the Oblivion Crisis kicks off, things will be okay. Alright, the Fighters Guild. We're in complete breakdown territory. Leyawiin and Bravil are firmly in Blackwood Company hands, as the Fighters Guild's reputation and actual membership are in the toilet all along the Niben River. They kind of botch things in Cheydinhal, and in Bruma they're basically a non-factor. Chorrol is where a lot of their higher-ranking members are, but they're busy sending recruits down south to contest with Blackwood Company. Nearby Hactor may become a more pressing concern as disappearances increase, so it wouldn't be shocking to see the leadership in Chorrol just completely bail on the situation down south. Without the Hero of Kvatch, the Anvil chapter is probably going to suffer from lack of manpower, but the issues there are fairly mundane. Still, if Blackwood Company can get a decent hold in Anvil, they'd be eating away at the Fighters Guild's influence from two different fronts. Anvil's wealth would be a massive boon to Blackwood Company and a huge loss to the Fighters Guild. And Skingrad's fine, and Kvatch is a crater. Somehow Blackwood Company will probably muscle in there too. So the Fighters Guild is facing an existential threat. The Mages Guild is facing an existential threat, and if the threat gets worse enough, it's going to endanger everyone else in Cyrodiil. Their hands are tied behind their back, and one of their hands is trying to kill the other hand because that hand is secretly a necromancer. I've hammered home the peculiarities of each chapter's incompetencies and shortcomings, but I need to emphasize how infested the Mages Guild and Cyrodiil in general are with necromancers. Even if Mannimarco wasn't returning to Wreck Shop, I'd still say that Cyrodiil is reaching a critical mass of necromancers and undead. I don't know if Hannibal Traven's decree against necromancy also barred anyone with more than 5 brain cells from operating within the Mages Guild, but it seems like the organization cannot maintain its manpower or its cohesion. The Chorrol Mountains are going to be absolutely infested with undead, and if Cyrodiil were in good shape, it would still be a chore to clear them out. Either we see an outright power play and Necromancer takeover from Mana Marco, or we at the very least see a hostile takeover of the Mages Guild with Mana Marco as the head. Which, given what's coming, might not be the worst thing. Daedric Prince Lightning Round! I wanted to give the Daedric Princes their own little section here, since even though they aren't on the same page and might actively hate each other sometimes, I felt they deserved a special spot together. So we're going to do just a really quick run through. Azura. Gutted Mind will remain infested with the Afflicted Brethren, another group of vampires to just heap on the pile. Boethia still holds the Tournament of 10 Bloods, somebody else wins a badass katana. Clavicus Vile, Umbra will likely continue to dwell in Vindicel, possibly losing control and going on a killing spree. Without the hero's adherence to Hermaeus Mora, at least 10 people get to keep their souls, pretty nice. Hircine, the unicorn gets to live! Jigalag. Malakath, the ogres of the Drad estate remain stuck toiling in the mines. For Mephala, absolutely nothing happens in Bleaker's way. Meridia's going to be bummed out that necromancers at Howling Cave continue their operations. Molag Bal isn't going to be able to convince Mellus Petilius to not be a pacifist anymore. For Namira, without your intervention, Priests of Arkay will continue to bug these losers. Bijin and Weebum Na keep the Eye of Nocturnal. The souls of some of Periite's followers remain stuck in Oblivion. Without you to do Sanguine's bidding, the people at Castle Leyawiin will be subjected to monotonous dinner party after monotonous dinner party with no end in sight. And without you helping out Sheogorath, this will not be happening at Border Watch. And finally, for Vermina, literally nothing changes. The wizard Arkved is still stuck in his nightmare no matter what. Sorry, dude. So there you have it. Honestly, it's somewhat of a mixed bag. Some of these are objectively good results, like Molag Bal not forcing a pacifist to renounce his oath. More often than not, the Daedric Princes are trying to get you to do something petty or outright evil. However, Meridia and Azura actively encourage you to rid Cyrodiil of some vampires and necromancers, a cleanup that's desperately needed right now. The biggest problem, in my opinion, is Umbra. She's exiled herself to stop the sword-induced bloodlust from getting out of control, but if she were to give in, you'd have an incredibly powerful warrior wielding a magic sword, slaughtering anyone she came across. I genuinely don't believe there's an individual fighter in Cyrodiil that could comfortably confront Umbra, and even if they could, they're likely far too important to be wandering the countryside hunting her down. You may have noticed that I skipped Mehrunes Dagon's questline for this section. That's because 1, we're not covering DLC here, and 2, he gets this. Let's start at the beginning with the assassination of Uriel Septim VII. I'm going to be an optimist here and say that it isn't unreasonable to assume that the Blade Baris can survive the ambush in the sewers, even if Uriel Septim cannot. He's handed the Amulet of Kings, tasked with bringing it to Joffrey, and finding the Emperor's heir. I think up until the point that Baris reaches Kvatch, it isn't controversial to say that he makes it. It's at Kvatch that I think Baris runs into a major roadblock. The gauntlet to close the Oblivion Gate at Kvatch is a bit much, and for the sake of this video, we're going to say that Baris dies heroically trying to save the various guards fighting for their lives inside the Deadlands. If you want a headcanon that Baris survives and redeems himself, that's wonderful, and I love that for you. For the sake of this video, he's melting in a pool of lava as 2 scamps fight over his boots. With the Oblivion Gates still open, the people of Kvatch are forced to flee or be overwhelmed by the Daedric forces. The Emperor's heir Martin originally refused to leave until everyone could leave the Chapel of Akatosh safely, so there's a good chance he's a goner. So Kvatch is a total loss, its people scattered or slaughtered, and the Septim line is ended. Can the people of Cyrodiil hold out? These red areas represent either guaranteed or possible Oblivion Gate locations, since they appear semi-randomly. However, Kvatch is overrun by Daedric forces, so I went a little crazy with my highlighter, and later on, Bruma has a similar invasion arrayed against them. Some quick things to note here. For the most part, the gates are evenly spread throughout Cyrodiil, but Leyawiin and Bravil only have 1 gate in between them, with the rest either on the other side of the Niben Bay or to the north. That is, of course, ignoring what elsewhere might look like. For all we know, there's plenty of gates open on the other side of that border. But we'll pretend that the gates in Elsewhere are focused on Elsewhere, and we'll focus on Cyrodiil. Great Gate aside, Bruma actually looks pretty good. As for the Imperial City, there's only one Oblivion Gate located on City Isle. In the case of a Daedric invasion, it seems your best bet is to head south, or rely on the city guard in Bruma and the Imperial City to keep you safe. Unfortunately, Skingrad and Anvil have their work cut out for them. Again, unless we think help is coming from Valenwood or Hammerfell, the devastation in Kvatch will spread and cut off Anvil. I'd expect the people of Anvil to try to take to the seas if possible, but in Rising Threat by Lathanil of Sunhold, that's right, I'm quoting canon books now, the sea is said to have betrayed his people when they attempted a similar tactic in Somerset Isle when the Daedra attacked. So if escape or mass exodus by sea isn't viable, Anvil is, as we say in scholarly circles, cooked. Skingrad is going to see some intense fighting, but it has resources to possibly pull from, which leads me to our next map. Vampires! While Count Janus deems the inhabitants of Bloodcrust Cavern to be little more than animals and doesn't seem bothered to have them killed, he's also incredibly pragmatic and has 2 more nearby camps of vampires to pull from if he wins them over. Count Janus is also just a formidable foe in his own right and can be expected to put up fierce resistance to the Daedric invasion. Hey, wanna see something cool? Pow! If you had trouble picturing just how many necromancers there were in Cyrodiil, there you go. Now, you might think to yourself, that's terrible, we've already got all these Daedra to deal with, necromancers are just making this worse. Listen, you might be right, but I'm going to keep it 100% with you. Mannimarco might be the best hope for Cyrodiil at this point. The transition of power might be a little messy in the Mages Guild, he might do some nasty things to get the job done, but he is an immensely powerful mage, basically a godlike figure that has meddled in the affairs of Daedra before. Before the Oblivion Crisis, this purple is extremely worrying. During the Crisis? I don't know. So here are the main points of resistance I see forming in Cyrodiil. First and foremost is Mannimarco, to the shock of nobody. If he can successfully replace, or better yet take over the Mages Guild, he could rally a large group of talented mages under one banner. The recent exodus of necromancers from the guild would be undone, and their underground operations could be repurposed to fight against the Daedra. If instead he chooses to just brutalize the Mages Guild and destroy it, he would still be in control of the largest, most powerful faction in Cyrodiil. Blackwood Company, don't think I've forgotten about you. You don't need to be a magical mastermind or be chosen by the gods to close an Oblivion Gate. We know that mundane people like the Bruma Guard are capable of closing gates with enough support or gumption. And in Black Marsh, Argonians actually push back the Daedric forces and invade the Deadlands, forcing the Daedra to close the gates of their own volition. Blackwood Company even utilizes Hiss Sap like the Argonian forces in Black Marsh. Given the home field advantage of fighting in Swamp, the relative calm surrounding Bravil and Leyawiin allowing them to focus their effort, and their surge in membership as the Fighters Guild continues to atrophy, and Blackwood Company can be expected to put up a hell of a fight in the south. Count Janus in Skingrad will put up a ton of resistance as mentioned earlier, although I can't quite convince myself that he'll form the vampire coalition that my heart desperately yearns for. If anything, Skingrad will at least buy time for the eastern half of Cyrodiil to prepare their defenses. For what it's worth, the Dark Brotherhood are largely intact and could theoretically lend their services to the resistance effort. I don't think anyone is about to give Mehrunes Dagon a poisoned apple or drop an anvil on his head, but the stealth skills of the Brotherhood might be used to snatch away a few sigil stones to close gates. The idea of the Dark Brotherhood closing gates as massive war machines are halfway through the portal puts a smile on my face. A couple honorable mentions before we get to our final site of resistance. The Deep Ones at Hactor might be able to do something. I'm a little doubtful because they were wiped out by the Imperial Legion, or at least pushed back into their caves, but it feels like there's something supernatural going on there. Maybe we're only seeing the little tendrils, the faintest whispers of their power, and they might get more directly involved as Mehrunes Dagon's invasion progresses. And of course the Sunken One. Maybe it really is the reason why Kvatch got absolutely annihilated, and we're all just fools. Finally, we find ourselves once again at Imperial City. By virtue of being the seat of Imperial power and having massive defenses, it'll naturally be a site of resistance. Originally, when Mehrunes Dagon attacked the Imperial City, it was to stop Martin from reigniting the dragon fires and foiling his invasion plan. Without this matter of urgency, does Dagon manifest himself in the capital? This is the point of resistance that I feel most conflicted about, since it seems like a no-brainer that it will eventually see the big man himself come down to fight, yet without the presence of Martin, he seems content to just kind of let Daedra slowly infest Tamriel. I envision the Imperial City to be a relatively safe haven for people who manage to flee from Cheydinhal, Chorrol, possibly Bruma if Mannimarco doesn't conscript everyone to go fight against the invasion force. But outside of having a fantasy scenario where Mannimarco and Count Janus MacGyver away to bring back the dragon fires, these are all delaying actions. Notice that I said points of resistance, not paths to victory. If you think there's something that I missed and that there is a way for someone to definitively counter the invasion, I'd love to hear it. Thank you for sticking around this long and watching the video. I want to do more videos like this in the future, taking a look at how game worlds hold up when you take away the player character. So if that's something that interests you, maybe hit the old follow button, I don't know. If you want to hear me talk about other video games, I have a podcast called No Player Connected, go check it out. If you want to see me actually play games, I do stream occasionally on Twitch. Okay, bye.